In Quebec today, 48 years after a 16-year-old girl was raped and murdered, police have identified her killer. Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin now on the cold case solved by science.
7:15 in the evening, March 29th, 1975. A stranger corners a young woman in an empty lot in Montreal. She fights. She screams. He runs. Half an hour later, a 16-year-old girl named Sharron Prior walks down that exact same street, completely unaware, on her way to meet her friends at a pizzeria 5 blocks from home. She is wearing her favorite suede jacket over a sweater she borrowed from her mother. She crosses the street. She does not look back. In less than 10 minutes, Sharron Prior will vanish. It will take 48 years, a mother who refused to stop asking questions, and a single overlooked piece of cloth to finally say who took her. This was one of the coldest cases in Canadian history. Unsolved for 48 years, until a forgotten piece of evidence finally spoke. Subscribe as we uncover the truth. Now, back to Point St. Charles. Sharron Kim Prior was born February 9, 1959, in Montreal. She was the eldest of 4, raised by her mother, Yvonne, in Point St. Charles, a tight-knit, working-class neighborhood locals just called the Point, the kind of place where everyone's mother knew everyone's business. Her parents had split when she was young, and Yvonne had brought her 4 children home to the only place that had ever felt safe to her. Sharron grew up gentle and watchful. She brought home stray cats and dogs, nursed them, and only then went looking for someone to adopt them. Her sisters would say for the rest of their lives that Sharron wanted to be a veterinarian. She played floor hockey at the local Boys and Girls Club, took art classes, took needlework lessons, patient work for a patient girl. By 1975, she was 16, a typical teenager in almost every way. She liked trendy clothes, she liked music, and she had finally started dating a boy named John McAleer, who had liked her since the 4th grade and had waited years for her to notice. Her mother would later describe her as cautious. Sharron always called if she was running late. She always came home. It would matter later. It would matter more than anyone could have predicted. The day it happened was the day before Easter, and it started like every other Saturday in the Prior house. Sharron woke, ate breakfast, made her bed, got dressed. Her mother went out that morning for last-minute groceries for the next day's dinner, and when she came home, Sharron helped carry everything inside. In the early afternoon, Sharron sat at the kitchen table painting Easter eggs for her younger siblings, her 11-year-old brother, George Jr., and Stephen, a 4-year-old boy the family was fostering. She had somewhere to be that afternoon, too. Sharron had spent months selling raffle tickets to earn her own green jacket from the Boys and Girls Club, the Leo's jacket, given only to kids who had proven themselves worthy of it. She had sold enough. She walked over that afternoon with Stephen to finally claim it. They did not have her size. She left with a receipt instead, disappointed but not defeated, planning to come back another day. That small piece of paper, forgettable, easy to lose, would end up meaning something none of them could have imagined. Sharron came home, kept painting eggs, helped her mother finish preparing for the holiday, and around 6 o'clock a friend from the neighborhood came by to keep her company while she got ready to go out. The girls had known each other for years, though they ran in different circles now, different schools, different friend groups, but the old friendship was easy, familiar, full of teasing about which sweater looked best. Sharron finally settled on one of her mother's sweaters, layered under her favorite suede jacket, and said goodbye a little after 7. Her friend offered to walk with her to Marina's pizzeria. Sharron said no thanks, she'd be fine. The 2 girls crossed the street together, then split off in opposite directions. It was around 7:15. At almost exactly that moment, on a nearby street, a 23-year-old woman named Cheryl Roy was walking to a pharmacy to buy diapers for her infant daughter. A man was walking toward her. He said nothing unusual. He did nothing that alarmed her. She would later say he looked, if anything, like someone who belonged in the neighborhood. Then he was behind her. He grabbed her, threatened her with a weapon, and ordered her in a low, calm voice to follow him. She fought. She screamed. He told her he was going to hurt her badly if she did not stop struggling. For nearly 6 minutes, in the open, in a residential neighborhood, a stranger tried to drag Cheryl Roy into an empty lot until a group of neighborhood boys came running toward the noise and the man let go and ran. Cheryl lost her voice from screaming for 2 full days afterward. She gave police a careful description. A man about 6 feet tall, roughly 200 pounds, blue eyes, a mustache squared off at the corners, wearing blue jeans, a dark blue ski jacket, and black shoes with pointed toes. He spoke only English, with no French accent, and there was no smell of alcohol on him. It was, by any measure, a deliberate, practiced attack. And it happened roughly half an hour before Sharron Prior left her house on a route that intersected the one she would have walked. Sharron never made it to Marina's pizzeria. Her friends waited, assumed she must have gone with John and the other boys to a hockey game instead, and kept enjoying their evening, unaware there was anything to worry about. When the game ended and the boys arrived at the restaurant without her, nobody had seen Sharron all night. Back home, her curfew came and went. Her mother sat up in the living room, watching the street from the window. Her twin sisters kept their own vigil from their bedroom window upstairs. 1:30 in the morning came, and there was still no sign of her. This was not like Sharron. By morning, Yvonne was phoning everyone she could think of. Nobody had seen her. And then a friend named Mary told Yvonne something that turned her fear into something closer to horror. That a woman named Cheryl had been confronted by an armed assailant on a nearby street the night before, right around the time Sharron would have been walking to the pizzeria, and that the direction the attacker fled in could easily have put him directly in her daughter's path. A search began almost immediately. Hundreds of volunteers and police combed the neighborhood, calling Sharron's name into the cold. Yvonne went on local television to plead for any information at all. Nothing came of it. As the days dragged past with no leads, some people quietly began to whisper that maybe the girl had simply run off. Her family rejected that outright, and the facts supported them. Sharron had left her bus pass and her money behind at the house. She had a boyfriend she adored, a family she was close to, and nothing in her life suggested she wanted to leave any of it behind. On the morning of April 1st, 4 days after Sharron disappeared, Yvonne was awake early when she noticed a familiar face, a neighborhood acquaintance named Ronnie, knocking on the door of a friend's house across the street, a folded newspaper under his arm. Something about it struck her as wrong. She called out to him. He mumbled something and kept knocking. She went outside, reached him, and before he could stop her, she had the newspaper out of his hands. He told her not to look. It was already too late. On the front page was a photograph of a body, found in the snow. Yvonne would say, for the rest of her life, that she knew immediately. She knew the shoes. The body had been found in a wooded field in Longueuil, a city roughly 25 minutes from the point, across the river from everything Sharron had ever known. She was too devastated to identify the body herself. Her brother went in her place. It was Sharron. The body had been discovered that morning by a local beekeeper named Jacques Beltran. He had gotten word that the gate to his apiary field was standing open, which struck him as strange. He was certain he had locked the padlock the night before, and with snow still on the ground, nobody had reason to be out there this early in the season. He drove out to check. The padlock hadn't been forced. It looked as though someone had simply opened it and driven through. Following the tire tracks onto the property, he found what he first thought was a pile of discarded clothing near the road. It was Sharron, roughly 75 feet from the road, in the snow. The evidence indicated a violent struggle. Investigators concluded from the scene that Sharron fought bravely for survival until the very end. The scene held more evidence than the era's forensic tools could fully use. About 15 feet away, police found tire tracks and a faint forensic trail leading from where a vehicle had been, parked to where Sharron's body lay. There were no drag marks in the snow and no mud on the bottoms of her shoes or socks, which told investigators she had almost certainly been carried, not walked, to that spot, and that more than one person may have been needed to do it so cleanly. Nearby lay a man's shirt, collar size 17, with 34-inch sleeves, believed to have been used to bind her wrists, which, based on its size, suggested a suspect close to 6 feet tall. Near a gate post, they found a single, clear shoe print, size 8.5, pressed deep enough to suggest a heavier man. And scattered around the scene were smaller, stranger clues. A ring engraved with the word love, a torn page from an English-language magazine showing a photograph of a young girl, a gun, a car seat cushion, and, not far from her body, the receipt for the jacket she never got to bring home. The autopsy, performed by Dr. Jean Hould, filled in the rest of what the scene could not. The official autopsy report determined that Sharron had succumbed to extensive physical trauma inflicted during the attack. She had been subjected to severe physical violence and assault. And the timeline the coroner reconstructed was, in its own quiet way, the most horrifying detail of all. Sharron had likely died only about 20 hours before she was found, on Tuesday afternoon, which meant she had been held somewhere, alive, from Saturday evening until Tuesday. 3 days. 200 mourners packed St. Matthew's Presbyterian Church on April 4, 1975, to say goodbye to a girl who had wanted, more than almost anything, to spend her life taking care of animals that couldn't take care of themselves. And here is the uncomfortable truth about what happened next. 13 months passed. Detectives eventually said they had interviewed well over 100 people connected to the case in some way. 6 suspects were detained at various points and released for lack of evidence. Early attention fell on Frank Daly, who went by the name Jerry Moore and managed Marina's Pizzeria, along with a wide circle of people connected to him and to the property in Longueuil where Sharron's body was found. Sharron's own friends and her boyfriend were questioned too. None of it led anywhere. As the months turned into years, leads dried up entirely, and the file that had once consumed an entire department slowly, quietly, went cold. Years later, an FBI-trained profiler named Greg McCrary reviewed the case and built a portrait of the kind of man who might have done this. He believed the killer was likely young, in his 20s, and quite possibly still living locally with his parents. He believed this was not the man's first offense, and he believed, based on how boldly and confidently the attacker had acted, first with Cheryl Roy, then, less than an hour later, with Sharron, that both crimes were almost certainly committed by the same person. 2 separate men attempting to abduct women in the same small, low-crime neighborhood within the same half-hour window was, in his professional judgment, simply too improbable to take seriously as coincidence. McCrary described a sadistic pattern common to this kind of offender, someone who starts by appearing charming to people he knows, grows steadily more controlling, and eventually, when compliant targets run out, turns to strangers. He believed police had very likely already spoken to this man during the initial investigation, one of the dozens of names on that list, questioned and released without a second look. In his experience, an offender who survives an early brush with police reacts one of 2 ways. Either his confidence grows because nothing happened to him, or he gets spooked and disappears entirely. 6 years later, in March of 1981, a 12-year-old girl named Tammy Leakey was sent out on a short errand from a friend's home in Point St. Charles, just blocks from where Sharron had vanished. She never came back. Her body was found that same night. Her case, like Sharron's, went unsolved for decades, and to this day the 2 cases are still discussed in the same breath by the people who have never stopped asking questions about that neighborhood in those years. Investigators also looked hard at the 1974 unresolved case of 12-year-old Norma O'Brien in nearby Chateau Gay, wondering whether one man could be responsible for all of it. No definitive link was ever proven in any of these cases, but the fear that something or someone had been allowed to keep hunting in that community for years was never fully put to rest. Every case on this channel takes weeks of digging through real records for real families. If this one is sitting with you, take 10 seconds and hit subscribe. There's still a name that needs to be said. Stay with us. In the year 2000, 25 years after her daughter's murder, Sharron Prior wrote to police and asked them to review the evidence using the newer forensic technology that had emerged since 1975. A week later, she received an answer that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Most of the physical evidence in Sharron's case, collected so carefully at the scene, had been destroyed by the department in 1995, without her knowledge, without her consent. What survived, thankfully, was Sharron's clothing. Investigators tested it and recovered a DNA profile, a real, usable genetic fingerprint of the man who had killed her. It did not match anyone in any existing database. The name behind that profile remained a complete unknown. In July of 2004, a tip led police to a garage space behind an apartment building, not far from the route Sharron would have walked that night, a possible place where she might have been held during those 3 missing days. They tore the space apart, tested for DNA. 3 samples came back. None of them matched Sharron. None of them matched her killer. In 2012, an anonymous donor raised the reward for information to $10,000 and opened a dedicated tip line. It generated speculation, headlines, hope, and, in the end, nothing conclusive. One more lead deserves mention, if only because of how close it came to derailing everything. Years into the investigation, the young woman who had helped chase off Cheryl Roy's attacker agreed to undergo hypnosis, hoping to recover any buried detail from that night. Afterward, shown a series of photographs, one man stood out to her, William Patrick Fife, a Canadian man who would later be convicted of killing 5 women in the Montreal area, with as many as 4 more admitted after his conviction. It was a chilling name to have surfaced. But by Fife's own account, his first killing did not happen until 1979, 4 years after Sharron's murder, and no physical evidence was ever found tying him to her case. Around the same time, a different rumor surfaced. A passage in a book about Montreal's biker underworld claiming that a Satan's Choice member nicknamed Crazy Mike had once boasted about killing a girl in Point St. Charles. That man was murdered himself in November of 1982, his own death never solved, taking whatever truth or bravado was behind his boast with him. Neither lead was ever substantiated. Both eventually joined the long list of names that had crossed this case and led nowhere. For nearly 20 more years, that was where things stood. And here is what changed everything. Not a witness, not a confession, but a single, overlooked piece of cloth. In 2019, DNA recovered decades earlier from the man's shirt used to bind Sharron's wrists, and from her clothing, was sent to a laboratory in the United States for forensic DNA phenotyping, essentially predicting a person's physical appearance directly from their genetic code. The results described a man with fair or very fair skin, green or hazel eyes, brown hair, and a tendency toward freckles. It was not a name. It was not even a photograph. But it was, for the first time in over 40 years, a face beginning to take shape out of nothing. Here is what makes genetic genealogy different from the DNA testing of decades past, and why it finally succeeded where every other attempt had failed. Traditional DNA testing looks for an exact match, the suspect's own profile, sitting in a criminal database, waiting to be found. If a man has never been arrested, never swabbed, in a way that entered a national system, he simply does not exist in that kind of search. Franklin Ramin, despite everything he had done, had somehow never once given a DNA sample to police in either country. Genetic genealogy works differently. It does not look for the man himself. It looks for his relatives, distant, innocent connections who had uploaded their own DNA results to a public genealogy website out of simple curiosity. Those connections are enough to begin building a family tree, and if investigators can build that tree wide enough, they can eventually narrow it down to the branch where the suspect must be sitting. In 2022, investigators examined the Y chromosome recovered from the evidence, the piece of DNA passed down almost unchanged from father to son, generation after generation, and ran it against public genealogy databases. A surname emerged, Romine, sometimes spelled Romaine. For the first time since 1975, investigators had something to actually chase. At almost the same moment, forensic scientists in Montreal submitted a piece of evidence that had never been fully tested before. Sharron's genes, recovered from the scene decades earlier, but set aside while other items were analyzed first. This time, using techniques that could recover a usable profile from far smaller amounts of genetic material than had ever been possible, they extracted a complete DNA profile from the genes. It matched the profile already found on the shirt and her garments. The case that had been running in circles for 47 years suddenly had a single, focused target. Investigators traced the Romine name to a family from Huntington, West Virginia. Records showed that a member of that family, born in 1946, had lived at 2 separate addresses in the Montreal and Longueuil area during the 1970s, and that his criminal record, when investigators finally pulled it, began not in his 20s but as a child, at the age of 11. He had escaped custody in the United States more than once. In 1974, he broke into a home in Parkersburg, West Virginia, where he severely attacked a woman after she rejected him. He was released on bond and immediately fled across the border into Canada. Just months after Sharron Prior's murder, he was captured by Canadian border officials and extradited back to West Virginia, where he was sentenced to serve time for the Parkersburg assault. He went on to accumulate at least 13 criminal convictions, with investigators eventually linking him to at least 4 other assault victims across 2 countries. His own family knew he was violent. One of his surviving brothers later revealed to investigators that Franklin had once threatened and physically attacked his brother's wife. After that, the family wanted nothing more to do with him. His name was Franklin Maywood Romine, and in 1975, at the time Sharron Prior was murdered, he was 28 years old, the same age Cheryl Roy had given police for the man who attacked her with a knife on the same street, half an hour before Sharron disappeared. He was roughly 6 feet tall. He had a mustache. In old family photographs, he had reddish-brown hair. Romine died in Montreal, in the Verdun neighborhood, in 1982, at the age of 36, under circumstances that were never entirely made clear. His body was sent back to the United States and buried beside his mother in a small cemetery in Putnam County, West Virginia. He had never once, in his entire life, given a DNA sample to any law enforcement agency. For over 40 years, that made him invisible to every database that might otherwise have caught him instantly. In December of 2022, investigators located Romine's 2 surviving brothers, one in Florida, one still in West Virginia, and asked them to voluntarily provide DNA samples. Both agreed without hesitation. Neither brother sounded surprised that Franklin might be connected to a murder. Comparing their Y chromosomes to the profile from the crime scene, forensic analysts calculated that it was roughly 140 million times more likely that the DNA belonged to a member of their direct paternal line than to an unrelated stranger. It was, by any reasonable standard, close to certainty. But it wasn't proof yet, because a brother's DNA is not the same as the man's own. To get that, investigators needed Franklin Romine himself. His siblings objected. He was buried beside their mother, and the thought of disturbing that grave was more than some of them could bear. A West Virginia judge weighed the family's objection against the weight of a 48-year-old unsolved murder and ruled in favor of the exhumation. On May 2, 2023, in a rural cemetery in Putnam County, investigators and a forensic biologist opened Franklin Romine's grave. The casket, made of steel, had corroded badly in the decades underground. The biologist worked carefully at the site, recovering several bones, among them the jaw and a femur, places she knew would still hold usable genetic material even after 41 years in the ground. The samples were cleaned, sealed, and flown to the Forensic Science Laboratory in Montreal. The results came back matching, completely and without ambiguity. The DNA profile recovered from Sharron's shirt, her clothing, and her jeans in 1975. On May 23, 2023, Longueuil police announced what they had found. Chief Inspector Pierre Duquette told reporters that they could now say, without qualification, that Franklin Ramin was 100% responsible for the death of Sharron Prior. Detective Sergeant Eric Rassicote, who had spent years chasing this case, described the moment the lab called him with the final result. He said it plainly, on camera, in front of the family, that after everything, it was really him, without any doubt. Sharron's mother, Yvonne, was there. So were her twin sisters, Doreen and Maureen, now in their 60s, still living with a question that had followed them their entire adult lives. "We are still grieving the loss of our daughter and sister, who was savagely murdered at the age of 16, Yvonne said. "Life has not been easy for us since then. But Sharron has given us strength for the past 48 years, and especially today." Think about what that number means. 48 years of not knowing. 48 years of wondering whether the answer would ever come, whether it would come in time for the people who needed it most. Here is the honest truth this script owes you. Closed is not the same word as solved. Not really. Not in any way that brings full comfort. Because Franklin Ramin was already dead, his identification closed the case without ever bringing him before a court. There was no trial. There was no jury. There was no moment where he had to stand and answer for what he did. Investigators said afterward that they were working with the FBI to check whether his DNA might connect him to other unsolved crimes in the United States, given how often he had crossed the border, and given how much of his adult life had been spent in and out of custody for violence against women. No new confirmed victims have been publicly announced beyond Sharron. What is certain is that a man capable of what happened to her walked free, crossed international borders more than once, and lived for another 7 years after her murder. Died not in a prison cell, but quietly in Montreal, close enough to the community he had shattered that some of the people who once feared him may have passed him on the street without ever knowing his name. In the years before the case was finally solved, Yvonne Prior had already turned her grief into something more public, joining other mothers of murdered and missing children in speaking out about how their cases had been handled, pushing for change in how cold cases were prioritized and how families were kept informed, or, too often, left in the dark. The Boys and Girls Club that once gave a teenage girl a green jacket to work toward eventually established a scholarship in her name, so that Sharron Prior would mean something to children in that neighborhood who never knew her and never will. Sharron Kim Prior. She was 16. She was cautious. She was the kind of daughter who called home when she was running late, every single time, without fail. She loved animals more than almost anything else in the world, and she wanted badly to spend her life saving them. The sick ones, the injured ones, the ones nobody else wanted to take a chance on. She had a boyfriend who had liked her since he was 9 years old and who finally worked up the courage to tell her. She had a mother who watched for her from the living room window long after there was any reasonable hope left to watch for, and 2 younger sisters who watched from the window above, keeping their own private, silent vigil. She left her house on an ordinary Saturday evening in a borrowed sweater and her favorite suede jacket, said goodbye the way she always did, and never came home. She should be 67 years old today. If there is a lesson in a case like this one, it is not really about strangers on dark streets, though that is part of it. It is about how long the truth can wait, buried, forgotten, mislabeled, discarded even by the people meant to protect it, and how a single piece of preserved evidence, a pair of genes nobody thought to test first, can still matter 47 years later. It is about a mother who never stopped asking a question long after most people would have quietly let it go. Franklin Ramin carried his secrets to the grave. His DNA finally exposed him. But the question that remains still haunts investigators today. How many other women crossed paths with a man who got away with murder for nearly 50 years? If this case stayed with you, and it should, hit like, subscribe, and tell us which moment landed hardest. No case stays cold forever. We'll see you in the next one.